Hello and welcome to BioRules video lessons. Today we are going to be talking about biogeography. Although it looks like it's the biology in geography, actually biogeography is a very specific subject into ecology of conservation. So biogeography has to do with what is going to be influencing population size, diversity, and so on. So first thing, what makes the population size? Populations are bigger when they have more resources. We are going to study this later, but this is a very intuitive phenomenon. The more resources you have, more the animals can feed themselves, more babies they can have, so bigger the population gets. So if resources influence population, what about biodiversity? Is resource going to be influencing biodiversity? And the answer for that you already have, because a while ago we took a look on pyramids, and I showed you three different biomes, pyramids, and the level of energy that we had in them. So tropical rainforest, for example, very big productivity. That means lots of light, lots of water, plants are capable of doing lots of photosynthesis, and in this example here, 5 trophic levels. If you have 5 trophic levels, we have more species. You have one more than what you have in a taiga, coniferous forest, that has less energy entering. So you have a smaller amount of energy that allows smaller, less lengthy food chain. So you have less trophic levels in a place with less energy entering. In the desert, that although it is usually very sunny, but doesn't have much water, has a very small productivity, and that results with small amount of energy in the beginning to have smaller trophic levels, because you don't manage to have more and more species there. So one thing that we know already, that more resources may equal more species, more trophic levels over there. However, there's a different phenomenon, which is the effect of area. Okay? Bigger area usually will imply that you have more resources. If you have a tiny little island, you're going to have few trees. If you have a much bigger island, you're going to have many more trees. More trees, more resources to maintain a population of herbivores that may be able to maintain a population of predators. And in a tiny little area, a tiny little island with very few trees, with a small population of herbivores, it might not be able to maintain a population of the predators. So bigger area, you have more resources. However, bigger area, you also might have a bigger heterogeneity. Different habitats in the island may be formed when you have a bigger island. If you have a small island, everything's going to be sand. But if you have a bigger island, you may have sand and a little bit of a mountain. You may have a swamp, a mountain, a river. So the bigger the area, more heterogeneous that island might be as well. Okay, so how the resources are going to be influencing the biodiversity? More resources, then you can have narrower niches, is still supporting a population. So you can have more species living together, narrowing their niches, having a smaller realized niche, but still with resources enough to maintain a population. So that means you're going to have more niches, more species. And if you have more heterogeneity, you're going to have more habitats. And if you have more habitats, different resources, you're going to have more niches. So area is expected to be related to richness, to the number of species, to biodiversity, and is going to be positively related. Bigger the area should have a bigger biodiversity. This was hypothesized by two brilliant guys, Wilson and MacArthur, and they went on to take a look on islands to see if this happens. One classic place to investigate this is the Caribbean. The Caribbean have islands. They are all quite isolated. They're in the middle of the Caribbean Ocean, but they have different sizes. So they got islands of different sizes in the Caribbean, and they investigated for the richness of the herpetorichness, the richness of reptiles and amphibians. And they have there on the left large islands, on the right small islands, and the trend that they saw was that the smaller the island, the smaller the richness of species of reptiles and amphibians. It matches the theory. Bigger islands, bigger richness. Smaller islands is smaller richness. Yay! Let's see another example. Okay, if this here is actually happening. Another example, they got the richness in an island, same islands there in the Caribbean, and they count the number of birds. Okay, this here is logarithmic scale, but the trend is fairly the same. Bigger islands, bigger richness. The smaller islands is smaller richness. So for birds, it also matched the theory. Bigger islands, more species were able of living in there, beautifully and nicely. So, in terms of islands, bigger is better, more biodiversity, okay? So, this is what you should expect, that bigger islands will have bigger richness. And then I ask you, if you would choose one of these islands to be preserved, which would have the highest richness? If you answered this, you got it right. Bigger islands, big richness. Well done. However, the size is not everything. Now, bigger islands, bigger richness, usually. However, there are other factors that might influence the richness of an island. And one of them, very important, that goes together with area, is the distance to the continent. Why is that? Okay. So different distances might have different richness. So which one you think is going to have a bigger richness? Do you want us closer to the continent? Do you want us far away in the middle? Which one? Okay, if you answered A, you got it right. The expectation would be for island A to have a bigger richness. Why? Let's take a look here. Why? So every island might be receiving species from the continent. The continent is a massive, gigantic island. It's a source, it's a repository of species. No, the continent is the definition of a big area, and bigger area, more species. So continents usually have many species, much more than any island. And the species, they go, once in a while, they manage to find their way towards the island. So islands are continuously receiving new species all the time. Of course, when you say here all the time, we're not saying every day, we're not saying every month, we may not even say every year, we may be saying every century or every millennia, but the species, they are always trying to get, to spread around, and islands will eventually be receiving new species. So islands theoretically should be increasing and increasing and increasing richness all the time. However, species are also continuously dying and getting extinguished from islands. If you have a species in an island and there is a especially strong drought, the species go extinct. In Dominica, for example, that we from the Swiss school visited a few years ago, 2019, they had a massive hurricane that dropped all the flowers from the islands. As a result, every hummingbird species that was smaller than a certain size got extincted. They didn't manage to survive. So species get extincted once in a while because of catastrophes, because of natural disasters, because it happens. Okay? And the idea is that the richness of species in an island may end up being a balance between how many species are arriving, how many species are getting extincted. The extinction depends on the amount of resources in the island, depends on the amount, the needs on the island and the size of the island, but the number of species arriving is a function of the distance to the continent. Closer islands receive species more frequently. So because of that, closer islands are expected to have a higher richness of species. To test that, Wilson and MacArthur again tried getting sky islands. Sky islands are mountaintops, species that live only on mountaintops. And they checked to see if these mountaintops, what was the distance, the isolation to a main massive Amazonic forest, and they checked what was the richness in mountaintops that were close to the source, high richness of species of mammals, and away, small richness of mammals. And they did the same here for birds. No, the isolation for birds. Basically, if you have closer sky islands, you had more species. Far away sky islands, you had less species. So basically, they confirmed the hypothesis that closer islands should have bigger biodiversity. The question is this for islands only? Okay, and to test that, the Smithsonian Institute, together with the Instituto Nacional de Pesquisa da Amazônia, INPA, they investigate to see if this happens to forest patches. Okay, and if it works for forest patches, it could be useful for other situations as well. So what did they do? In Amazon, they were cutting the forests for agriculture and for cattle. Okay, these farms here, they were farms, they were going to be cut anyway. So what INPA did was to get there to those farmers and say, okay, you're going to cut down, but by law, you need to keep some patches of islands, of some patches of forests. So can you keep patches of forest with a certain size and with a certain distance from the national park that's nearby here? And they agreed, and they did. They kept forest patches of 1 square kilometer, 1 hectare, 100 by 100, 10 hectares, and 100 hectares. So they had 3 different sizes, and they had different distances to the Duke National Forest that's close to there. And what they saw is that for forest and for mountaintops, it worked beautifully. Okay, the bigger the area, bigger was the richness. The 100 hectares forest had much bigger biodiversity after a few years than the 1 hectare forest. And the distance also had a negative correlation. The further the patch was from the preserve, the smaller was the richness. So this works for forest patches, this works for mountaintops, it's not only for islands. Okay, so in terms of management, if your company decides to buy a forest patch, transform it into a preserve, okay, to preserve biodiversity, if you have some available options, which patches would you suggest for them to buy? Okay, so there on the left you have a main forest, a national park, and you have forest A, B, C, or D. Which of this is the one that would be buying? Think for a while. Would you suggest forest A, or B, or C, or D? If you answer forest D, you probably thought, yes, it's the biggest one. Bigger is better. Okay, so that's it's a good advice. Bigger forests are usually good. However, forest A is bigger than forest D. No, it's not bigger, sorry, it's smaller than forest D, but not much smaller, and it's reasonably closer to the main forest. So probably forest A will have a bigger biodiversity than forest D. So a good advice here would be invest buying forest A. Okay, so there it goes. Okay, there are alternatives to big fragments. Okay, if it's impossible to keep one big patch of forest, what can we do? One of the solutions is to keep small patches. So in Brazil, for example, if you have a farm, you cannot cut 100% of the land down to make area for agriculture or an area for cattle. You need to keep a certain percentage of the area. So some patches, it will be important that you keep. If you can keep all the patches together, making a bigger patch, that will increase the preservation, it will increase the biodiversity there in your forest. However, sometimes that's not possible, and then there are alternatives. One alternative is keeping many small patches. It might be a problem because they are isolated, they are going to have a smaller biodiversity, but what if we can, using a little bit more land, increase the biodiversity? And the idea for that is making this, building land corridors. Land corridors are thin strips of forest, 50 meters wide, 100 meters wide tops, so not very, very wide. Some corridors, they are not occupying much space in your farm. You still be producing a lot, but now you just connected the 4 patches. 4 connected patches behave as quite one big one. So you have a bigger biodiversity if you connect your patches. And something else that can happen, that can help you to connect your patches, is for you to keep the forest beside the rivers. Rivers, they have usually forest around them, and if you keep the ciliary forests, you might now have a corridor connecting forest patches, so you just have to keep your patches close to rivers, and you are also protecting the rivers itself from erosion and destruction. So that's the way for us to preserve. If you have a farm and you do have to cut down to produce food, one idea is whatever you have to keep up in patches the biggest as possible, but if they cannot be continuous, so connect them with corridors, especially connect them with river corridors, ciliary forest corridors, and you're going to have a much bigger biodiversity in there. Okay? Other active management that we could do related to preserves is, one of them is to pay attention to the border effects. Okay? If you cut a patch, so this here in the middle is representing a little forest, and if you cut that little forest, the border of the fragment will suffer invasion from pioneer species, will be in a succession mode, because when you cut the forest on the sides of the border, more light enters. So pioneer plants that usually grow when you have a fallen tree, they start growing there. So usually the border, it's something between 20 to 75 meters from the border to inside of the forest, is a forest that stays in a continuous intermediate succession stage. You're going to have some climax species because they were already there, but now you're going to also have pioneer species, and it's not a typical climax forest. So if you still have the middle of the forest here as climax, and you now have the border, okay, the border will be kind of disrupted, but it will also have more species, because now you have also border species. So actually, the border effect may increase biodiversity if you still have enough fragments in the middle to have enough of climax forest in the middle. Another thing that you have to be careful with is with fire. Fire can be good or can be bad. Okay? So, some places we need to do fire suppression to avoid excessive fire, that would routinely destroy the vegetation. But some places we need to put fire on them, because some places, if they don't burn, they accumulate too much material. So in some places they are supposed to burn once in a while. And when you let it burn naturally, or even if you put fire once in a while in that place, you are actually allowing to reduce the accumulation of organic matter. So when there is a fire, the fire is going to be smaller. If you don't let it burn, the fire may accumulate material, so be stronger, more intense, hotter, and more devastating fire. Just to illustrate this, in the Serra do Cipó, there is a place there, there's a national park in Forest do Cipó, and there was a place there that used to happen to have a tree called Velozes gigantes. It's a tree that's actually not very big, 3-4 meters tall, but those 3-4 meters tall plants, they were hundreds of years old, and they happened to exist only in a place that was remaining the size of a football field. That was the only place in the entire planet that species lived. But Serra do Cipó is a place that's supposed to burn once in a while. But the government, they got so afraid with this species that only existed there, that they put all the effort in the world to prevent that area to burn. So every fire that started close to there, they made everything to stop. So they managed to avoid that place to burn during 15 years. For 15 consecutive years, it never burned there. Everywhere around burned, because as you know, things are burning, every 1 or 2 years things burn. But they didn't allow that place to burn because they are trying to protect that species. However, in the year 16, there was a fire that managed to spread there. There was so much material, dead leaves and stuff, that the fire was uncontrollable, and the fire was very, very, very big and very warm. As a result, the fire was so warm that managed to kill those trees that were adapted to survive fire. They were adapted to survive small fires, but now they were dead and extincted because the government tried to protect them, not allowing them to burn. So fire in some places are expected, in others not. No, most of Amazon is not supposed to burn. Most of Pantanal is not supposed to burn. It's a wet forest. But some places like the Cerrado, like the grasslands, they are supposed to burn. Okay? Fire rings may be interesting. No, especially when you cut roads around forests, you create a fire ring. So if there is fire in one side of the road, this fire don't manage to spread to the other fire, to the other side of the road. So it's a way to help to hold fire from spreading. They do this in many preserves to have roads around. So the researchers can go around. No, we can go around to do research and also avoid fire from spreading. And finally, hunting. Some place, of course, you have to protect the species from hunting, because if you excessively hunt, you're going to be destroying all the food web over there, and you may damage the keystone species. However, in some places, sometimes it's necessary to hunt, especially when a top predator was extincted. So in Yellowstone, the wolves were extincted. As a result, the herbivores that used to be food for wolves, they start growing and growing and growing. So actually the government needed to start making a management hunting those deers to be able to control the population. Otherwise, they would destroy the environment by overgrazing. Okay? So, if you want to see a simulation on biogeography, there is one here just for you to run and see how it goes. It's in this QR code here. Take a look and run the simulator. See which of these islands here you have a bigger biodiversity. Check out and see. And now, one questionnaire here with a few questions for you to exercise and know how much you learned from this unit. From this topic. I hope you had fun. I see you in the next class.